Heavenly Father, we are thankful to be here to discuss things. We're thankful for an open environment where we can even discuss things like baptism, just to wrestle through those things, to understand them, to understand different points of view. And then give us extra special grace as we really kind of delve into the area of philosophy. How do we come to know truth? How does our world come to know truth, and how has it impacted us? Give us wisdom in that and discernment. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So postmodern epistemology, there's some big words for you, right? So let's do something that's a little bit easier to understand. How many of you watch Karate Kid? Has anyone not watched Karate Kid?
It's like a month ago.
I was going to say. I mean,
Which
So,
version?
well, I'm going to go classic old school, okay? Daniel's son. So in Karate Kid, right, what does Mr. Miyagi have him do before he's able to actually learn to fight? Okay?
He does.
Wax on?
He works.
Wax off. Up, down, again and again and again and again. And he doesn't understand why he's doing it, right, at the time, until later on he learns to fight and he realizes, whoa, those are some foundational movements that play directly into his ability to fight and to learn the actual moves he wanted to learn. And oftentimes, we don't have that benefit of knowing how foundational things shape why we do things today. But I'm going to guarantee there are lots of underlying things that are going on in the world that shape how you think. Okay? And that's what we're getting at today. Postmodern epistemology. So what is this very fancy word, epistemology? Webster's dictionary says, the theory or science of the method or grounds of knowledge. Okay? So how do you come to knowledge? Paul Feinberg said this, it's the branch of philosophy that is concerned with the theory of knowledge. It is an inquiry into the nature and source of knowledge, the bounds of knowledge, and the justification of claims to knowledge. So it's how you've come to know things is essentially what we're talking about tonight. Now, you came here expecting a theology class tonight, right? I am sorry to inform you, this is really Philosophy 101 tonight. We're going deep into philosophy. Remember, we said, hey, systematic theology last week, right? Pulls from all sorts of sources to help us understand things. And philosophy is one of those things that helps us understand what is going into shaping our reading of the Bible. Okay? And so we have to talk a lot about this word postmodernism tonight, because it has impacted every single person in this room one way or another, whether you choose to admit it or not. So here are some terms you need to know. Some more scary terms. Ray, start us off.
All right. So we've got relativism, which is the belief that all truth is relative, being determined by some group. So relative means, basically it's the opposite of absolute, right? It's this idea that certain groups determine their own truth, and that's true for them, but that doesn't have to be true for us. So a group of people in 16th century France could have believed something about morality, about truth, about ethics, and for them that was true. That made sense for them in their culture, but that doesn't necessarily make it true for everyone in the world at that time or true for us today. But we can't discount the fact that that was fine for them to believe.
Okay, so to put this down to earth, this morning in our class, some of my people came into class complaining that the Casey's in Reynolds was closed. Anyone else impacted by that today? Okay. And as I was listening to the banter back and forth, there were all sorts of possibilities thrown out there, okay? And so when we came to this part, I just jumped on it. I said, okay, guys, let's figure out, we're going to practice relativism, and we're going to determine why the Casey's was closed. And so we determined it was closed because there's some super new variant of COVID that killed everybody there. That's our truth, okay? It doesn't matter if that's actually what happened or not, but relativism says that's our truth, and as a group, we agreed upon it. That's relativism.
Yeah. And then that would impact how you live your life from there. It's not just this broad idea, it's what we believe, and then how does that impact how we live.
Exactly. Right?
So let's say the next day that group comes to find out that really wasn't the case. Do they still hang on to that That's what we agreed upon.
La la la, we don't care.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, we
yeah.
agreed upon it. That's
Yeah,
our truth.
Right.
Okay, so now we have subjectivism, okay? The belief that all truth is subjective, being defined by the perspective of the individual, okay? And so then I picked on one person in the room. We'll do Brandon because he was brave enough to ask a question about relativism. So Brandon, we're all agreeing it's COVID variant killed them all. Brandon's like, no, you don't understand. One of the gals that works there won the lottery, and she gave them all money, and they're all on a trip to Bahamas. That's his subjective truth because it started with his individual perspective. He has no idea. He doesn't know a single person who works there. It doesn't matter if there was a lottery that night or not. It doesn't matter. That's his truth. He came to it. That's subjectivism. Okay? And so then now somebody might say, hey, this is really what happened. The group's going to be, no. We got it figured out. And Brandon's going to be like, no, they're a bunch of idiots. I got it figured out. Okay, someone won the lottery.
So the term "what's true for you" doesn't have to be true for me. That's kind of that idea. It's we define our own truth.
Yeah. Be a skeptic, right?
I shall, or will I? So skepticism is the belief that truth cannot be known with certainty. So on the good end of this, right, that takes some humility for us as human beings to say, I've been on earth 20, 30, 40, 50, however many years. I'm hesitant to say that I know absolutely everything, that what I'm saying is definitely true and that there's no way I can be wrong. That's a good way. But a lot of times where we see this is almost in a lazy way of saying, well, we just can't know, so why try? Or, and it can even lead into relativism and subjectivism of, well, here's what I believe or here's what we believe. We can't know for certain, so just kind of let us be comfortable and just let us be with the truth that we maybe believe, knowing that we're all probably wrong because nobody can know, so why argue, why debate, why try?
So the skeptic will come along and say, to use our Casey's illustration, in fact, actually somebody in our class this morning actually did know the reason why the Casey's was closed. They had recently had some people quit to go find another job, and so they were short-staffed. This one gal happened to be the only person who was left and was scheduled that day, working all by herself, and it was her birthday, and she said, forget this, I quit. That's the real reason the Casey's was closed. So the skeptic would come in and say, when somebody actually says, here's the objective truth, I got proof and everything like that, the skeptic would say, we just can't know true, I don't trust that, I don't think so. And the relativism, you guys are all now saying, no, it's COVID. And then Brandon up here, he's saying,
I'm saying someone won the lottery and they're
exactly.
on a trip to Bahamas.
And we all just don't care what the actual truth is. Perspectivism. That's the belief that truth is found in the combined perspectives of many. Okay? So that's where you basically take that truth and you're able to then reproduce it amongst lots of groups. So Brandon, looking for some individuals who will back him up now, not looking for truth, gets on Facebook and gets a whole following saying, hey, look, I have 1 million people who agree with me that they won the lottery and that's why they're not working. And that would be the idea of perspectivism. Be a pragmatist now, right?
All right. So the phrase "the end justifies the means" is basically pragmatism. You have the outcome you want. You don't really care how you get there as long as you get there. So if our ultimate goal is happiness, then if drinking or doing drugs makes me happy, why not? My goal is happiness. If I'm feeling sad or burdened by my marriage or by my family, then why not get a divorce? Why not abandon my family and go become a country rock star, or go along with my mistress or my mister? I don't know the male version. That's what pragmatism is I want to be happy, I want to be successful. As a church, maybe we want growth. It does not matter how we get there or what leads us there, as long as we get there. And if we're successful, then that means we were right to do what we did to get there.
Yeah. So here's how pragmatism works in our Casey's illustration.
I'm so excited to hear this one.
Ray comes along and he says, I don't like Casey's. Do you know they put water in their gas? Anyone ever heard that rumor before?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
They also don't sell mac and cheese pizza anymore.
And they don't sell mac and cheese pizza.
I'm on board with
So
this.
he doesn't like Casey's. He thinks Casey's is evil. Okay? So he's saying, you know what? It doesn't really matter if Casey's is evil or not, or the people who work there are good or not, or whatever the case is. I don't like them, and I want to get them completely shut down. So he perpetuates this rumor of COVID, the water in the gas, gets a huge following online, And it doesn't matter. Now he has millions upon millions of people boycotting Casey's. People are showing up with signs saying Casey kills babies or something like that. And he's just sitting here saying the ends justifies the means. You know, I don't like Casey's, and I did good, and I got them shut down. They don't exist anymore. That's pragmatism. Now you may say these are kind of facetious, wild illustrations to drive the point home. But pragmatism does seep into the church as well. Okay? So oftentimes church becomes nothing more than a numbers game. Oh, you know how many people were at church this morning? Oh, we must be successful. Look how many people signed up for the Sunday evening theology program class. We had like 30 people. That's the better class. It's more successful. The morning class only has 14 people. And 2 of those people come to the evening one. So which class is more successful? I should just shut down the morning class, shouldn't I? If I want pragmatism. If it's all a numbers game. So you got to be careful with that. Outward success is not a guarantee of what is actually true or what is right. So we have to be careful with pragmatism.
So, and another way to think about that is the opposite, saying we aren't seeing the growth that we want, so we're doing something wrong. So if the elders are looking, we're preaching the gospel every week, we're being true to the Bible, but the church down the street that is just doing, music and giveaways, they're growing more. Well, pragmatism says, well, we're not getting the growth like they are, so we need to stop doing what we're doing. We need to stop following what's true and right because we need to boost our numbers.
Yeah. So Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll, doesn't exist anymore. Well, Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll does, right? And so if you listen to the interviews after all that failed, all of them have a common saying. Well, people were getting saved and baptized. We were growing. Look at the numbers. And they would say the numbers justify what we're doing, even though there was an entire culture of abuse and misogyny and crassness and all sorts of things happening within that church. All that's okay. We can justify that because over here, look how good things are. That's pragmatism. So let's get objective. Objectivism is the belief that truth is an objective reality that exists whether someone believes it or not. Okay? So it is the way things are. It's testable, it's verifiable, it's knowable. It's the way things are whether anybody believes it or not, type of thing. Okay? So, let me ask you this. If you needed to blow your nose, what would you grab?
A tissue.
Oh, a tissue. Okay, good. Because many people say what?
Kleenex.
Did you know Kleenex is a brand and not the actual product?
Yeah.
See? Now, somebody would say, well, that doesn't matter. Objective truth is it's a tissue, but we'll just say Kleenex and that's fine. So, because perspectivism, a large amount of people across a large swath of the world have said it's a Kleenex.
Great marketing.
Great marketing. Yeah, exactly. So, which one of these best describes our culture? That's for you to answer. Ray and I are going to be silent for a moment. Which one of these best describes our culture?
When you say our culture, do you mean High Point's culture or our culture as the world stands?
Western society.
I would say it's one and the same. I would say the High Point culture is no different than the world's culture in a lot of ways, as far as when it comes to these things.
Does all of the above count?
Better be 6.
Sure. I may argue that 6 doesn't exist in a lot of ways anymore for a lot of people. But yeah, you're right. You'll see a little bit of all of them in culture, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's in the church or out of the church. These do exist to varying degrees. So which one is true, though?
Objective?
Okay?
If one can be true.
I see.
Maybe that's just
Wait a
true
minute.
because it's true to you.
Skepticism.
But it's not true to somebody else.
But it's verifiable.
Oh, okay. So, see, that becomes the issue. I bring that up and I push back a little bit. I would agree that objective truth is as close as we're going to get to accurate on this page until we get to next week and we look at the Christian epistemology and how a Christian should come to truth, which is none of these, by the way. So it would be, the thing is, we're going to now look at a video here in a little bit of somebody who is very postmodern, okay? And when we run into people who think like this, it's really easy sometimes for us to like laugh at them, to make fun of them, to think they're stupid and they don't know any better. The problem is, the people who really hold to these, okay, and practice these are actually very intelligent and very smart. They're wrestling through these things. And so when we just write them off as they have no idea what they're talking about, we're losing an opportunity to interact with them. Maybe we want to lose it because some days they can be very frustrating to talk to. But I think if we can start to understand that these have actually permeated the way even conservative Christians think, okay, I think we can start to appreciate them a little bit more and say, listen, it's not right, but I can at least understand we're the byproduct of the exact same culture. Okay. So, what is postmodernism, since that's what this class is all about? Well, let's get a nice little video here, shall we?
What's 2 plus 2? 4. I think it's 7. Am I wrong?
Whoa,
Man.
sorry, I hit the wrong button there. I meant to hit the volume up.
What's 2 plus 2? 4. I think it's 7. Am I wrong?
Maybe.
Maybe.
I mean,
What are you studying?
industrial engineering.
What kind of an industrial engineer thinks 2 plus 2 might be 7?
I mean, it could be kind of abstract. I mean, you could, with a different dimension, maybe it's 7.
This dimension.
Then 4.
And so I'd be wrong.
I don't know.
All right, here you go. I think Oprah Winfrey is the great goddess of the universe. Okay, you with me so far? Yeah. And if I say her name 7 times right before I die, I'm going to live for eternity in her high-rise penthouse in Chicago, enjoying a healthy diet with her personal trainer for all of eternity. That's what I believe. Am I wrong?
No.
How do you know?
I mean, that's your perception of reality, so
Okay. Do you think I'm right?
no.
Do you think I'm wrong?
No.
So then you think I'm right?
No.
Then I must be wrong.
No.
Like a Catholic. Okay, so how, you don't agree with me though, correct?
No.
Why not? It's dopey.
Well, I'm just saying, your perception of reality is different than my perception of reality, so you can believe whatever you want about this universe, and I can believe what I want. They don't have to be the same.
What's your first name, young man?
Dan.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Now, I agree with you when it comes to art. We can interpret that if we want to, unless, of course, the author came along and said, no, I'll tell you exactly what it means, and that's what it means based on the author's intentions, okay? But when it comes to truth, it's not a personal preference. It is either true or it is not true, correct?
Well, in your perception of reality, sure.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you one that's maybe way out there, all right? Is this reality?
Sure. In my perception of it,
Are we even here for sure?
maybe. Some people say we're just blobs of energy floating around in space.
So I might not even be here. I might actually just be somebody's imagination right now.
Sure.
You too.
Yep.
We just happen to be floating in somebody's imagination, potentially.
Potentially.
Okay, and you're sure about that?
And one perception of reality, sure.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Okay, what do you plan on engineering someday?
What I plan on doing, getting a job in a bad economy.
Yeah, but building anything in particular?
Not anything in particular, maybe consulting or.
Okay, nothing I might have to drive over
No.
or need a seatbelt top.
No,
Okay,
no.
all right, dude, thanks for the tip. What you just heard from Dan is the predominant mindset these days. It's called postmodernism. All truth is valid truth. Now with art, maybe, depending on what the author's intent is, but when it comes to truth, you don't have a preference. It either is or it isn't. Welcome to the 21st century.
Okay, so real quick. Okay, we laughed a little bit at the end there because it's kind of funny because he says nothing up to drive across. But the reality is, okay, well that sounds objectionable. But the reality is that young man could easily build a bridge, you know, because he's not going to put that into practice when he's doing 2 + 2. Does that equal up to make a bridge type thing? Okay, so that's the problem of postmodernism. They hold to this philosophy, they think this way, but in actuality, they cannot live this way because nobody could. Okay? Postmodernism is self-defeating. It has destroyed itself. In fact, actually, we're going to introduce another concept called post-truth or postmodernism that actually is what we're in currently, because postmodernism is dead. Okay?
And so one thing to also point out about the video is, we kind of look at it and we laugh and think, oh, he's an idiot or he's just deluded. But what we need to realize is, he's got maybe 20 years of experiences that have led him to the point where he honestly believes, and he lives his life as much as he can, believing that we can't know truth with certainty. There's a reason, there's a history, both in his own life and just in our culture, of why people are so suspicious of any claims of truth. Even something as simple as, I have 2 apples and 2 apples, now I have 4 apples. There's a reason that people are so suspicious of that. And it's not just because they're poor and deluded and idiots and we've got it all figured out. There is something that has happened in their lives and in the culture that's brought that about, that makes it something that we need to understand so that we know how to respond.
I don't think you have apples. I think you have mangoes.
Next slide.
Christians today cannot work with the same assumptions that we did just 20 years ago. At that time, people would join you in their search for absolute truth. It is different now. Today, before we begin to lead people to the truth of Jesus Christ, we may have to actually just lead them to the truth of truth, that you can actually know something. Common ground must be created before the gospel can be proclaimed. And on the next slide is a continuation of this thought process. He says 20 years. If you read that, this was written in 1996. So 20 years back, 1976 is when he's saying that you could still actually reason with people on things. But even in the 90s, postmodernism was actually at its height, I would argue, in the early 2000s. Apologetically, the question which arises in the postmodern context is the following. How can Christianity's claims to truth be taken seriously when there are so many rival alternatives and when truth itself has become a devalued notion? No one can lay claim to possession of truth. It's all a question of perspective. The conclusion of this line of thought is as simple as it is devastating. The truth is that there is no truth. Okay? That's what postmodernism does. Now, you can actually see this played out in Christianity. You can go into a room of Christians and you can ask, do you believe in Jesus? And probably all of them will say yes. And then if you say, do you exclusively believe in Jesus? In other words, you'll say, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father except through him. And you say, can you only come to God? Can you only get to heaven by receiving Christ as your Savior? Many will say, absolutely not. That's true for me. That's how God's revealed that truth to me. But there are many other valid truths. They would say, all religions lead to God. Okay, that's ecumenism.
Ecumenism.
Thank you. It's been a long day already. This is the second time I taught this. This is why Ray's here, to kind of help me keep me accountable. Okay? So have you ever met a Christian that believes that? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know this to be true. I'm not saying anything you don't know.
I believe some parts of the Bible, but not others.
That's another problem,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we're going to address that here in a moment. Well, how did we come to that in history? How does modernism affect us? And that's what, so we're going some places. I think everyone's light bulbs are going to start coming on and be like, wow, that explains our world so perfectly by the end of this, I hope.
Can I add something to that, Pastor Chris? It's like, and then it's like, to me, where I got confused when it came to things is like somebody's interpretation of what not scripture or whatever, like
Sure.
that interpretation. Because really, I did not know, and I feel stupid that I should know this, but I didn't, that there was all these different Bible versions, like the ESV and the CV. I mean, and so I just always thought there was this one version, and then all these different interpretations.
Well, those are translations.
Those are translations, not different interpretations.
Right.
There's a different. Well, the ESV, the NASB, the King James, the New King James, the New Living Translation, the NIV, they all say the same thing.
Right.
When it comes down to it, just slightly different English words.
Yeah.
Because it's somebody who's doing the translation saying, I think this English word best encapsulates this Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic word. In effect. when we get to not this set of classes, Intro to Theology, but when we get to Bibliology, we'll talk about that and how that all comes about, and we'll dive deep into that, and it'll bring some clarity for you. Okay, so this is a real conversation recorded in history in the 4th century BC between Protagoras and Socrates. Okay? Protagoras says truth is relative. It is only a matter of opinion. You know, they're Greeks, big into philosophy. That's where this comes from. So he says truth is relative. It's only a matter of opinion. Socrates says, you mean that truth is just mere subjective opinion? And Protagoras says, exactly. What is true for you is true for you, and what is true for me is true for me. Truth is subjective. Socrates says, do you really mean that? That my opinion is true by virtue of it just being my opinion? Protagoras says, indeed I do. Socrates puts on his sassy pants and says, my opinion is truth is absolute, not opinion. And that you, Mr. Protagoras, are absolutely in error. Since this is my opinion, you must grant that it is true according to your philosophy. And Protagoras answers, you're quite correct, Socrates. They're being true to their understanding of things. So this, now, all the way back then, 2,400 years ago, they were still struggling with this issue of epistemology, okay? But the difference is nobody took Protagoras seriously back then. Today, for the last 100, 200 years, especially even today, people are taking this type of stuff very seriously and trying to apply it to their lives.
And this is why for the past few decades, it's been so hard to have conversations with people, because we're not all trying to arrive at truth from different directions. We're not all holding different versions of truth. Like one of the quotes said, there's people, we have to just convince them that truth is actually a thing that we can arrive at. And that is a huge mountain to climb, because, I mean, someone can just say, well, that's your truth, that's your truth, that's your truth. And they can repeat that 1,000 times and not have to budge, because they don't have anything they have to fight for, because it's all relative.
And it can even get more frustrating, because you might be saying things and they're hearing you say words, but they have actually ascribed a totally different meaning to those words. And so you're not even using the same language anymore, even though you're using the same English language. But they just said those words mean totally different things to me, because they've decided that's what it does. Culture does it all the time. So 70 years ago, if somebody stood up and said they're gay, what would that mean? If somebody stands up and says they're gay today, what does that mean? Exactly. So people change the definitions of words all the time. That's a very extreme one that everybody knows, but it even happens with everyday words, and we're not even aware of it half the time. Which is half the time when you see people argue on social media or in politics or on CNN or Fox News or whatever your flavor of news is out there, people are talking to one another, and it doesn't make any sense, because it sounds like they're saying the same thing, but they're not, because the words have totally different definitions on both sides. They might as well be speaking Greek and Italian. So, but remember I said postmodernism is self-defeating, okay? There are self-defeating statements, and that's oftentimes what postmodernism leads to. Like, I cannot speak a word of English. What's wrong with that sentence? Yeah, I just spoke some English words. If I say my wife has never been married. We cannot know anything about God. What's wrong with that statement?
Well, you just said God.
Well, yeah, that statement makes a truth claim about God.
Right.
The fact that we can't know anything about God, assuming that's true, would be a true statement about God from that person's perspective.
Right.
In other words, the truth about God is that God is unknowable. It doesn't work, because that's at least one thing we can know about God,
Right.
which then makes him knowable.
Exactly. There is no such thing as truth. Well, then you can't take that as a valid truth statement. Mm-hmm. Truth cannot be known with certainty. Well, then you can't be certain about that statement either.
Yeah, can and cannot are certain statements, right? They're absolute.
Just running on the hamster.
And here's the funny thing. Sometimes people will say statements like that, and they sound really intelligent and really smart. And you're just like, and if you don't stop and think about it, you'll just let it pass on by. We have to be careful with that. Okay, here is Ray's favorite part. We're going to do something called the stage of truth. Okay? So, I'm going to introduce the stage of truth. Ray's going to run the stage of truth. Okay, he is the. So, how many of you have been to a play? Okay, now, in play, in stagecraft, it is very important that when you're on stage, everything is carefully crafted so that you look at the right things at the right time. Usually the things in the very front is what you're supposed to focus on, and then as the layers go deeper and deeper, less focus, okay? And so usually that's why you see when somebody starts to speak, they have a tendency to come up to the front and the light shine on them, okay? And so we're going to say this is our stage, this empty space right here, in case you were wondering why it was empty. And in this stage of truth, we're going to have 3 players from our studio audience who are going to be in our play called The Stage of Truth. So to have these individuals, we need 3 volunteers, and we're going to whittle it down, very scientific method, very objective reality here.
Now, Chris, I have something I want to do for the Bible one.
Oh,
Sorry.
just taking all my thunder. Well, fine, then
Only
I'll do
only a
scripture
third-
last.
Only a third of
So,
it.
put your hand up if you have a sibling. Okay? Put your hand down if you only have one. Okay? If you only have 2, put a hand down. If you only have 3, put a hand down. I think that's you, Dave. You must have more siblings than anybody in the room.
We've got 2 back here.
Oh, I didn't see some hands. I'm sorry. From my perspective,
Gotta be proud of
Brandon
those
was
siblings.
blocking, and then Vince was blocking. Okay, so sorry. Okay, put your hand. What did I end on?
That was 3.
3.
3. Put your hand up if you have only 4.
Put my hand up or hand down?
Well, if you have 4, put your hand up. Or no, if you have 5, put your hand up. You have 5 at least? 6?
I don't.
Oh, 5. You're up.
Number 6.
Come on up here. You are tradition, because usually people with the biggest families have the biggest traditions.
All right. Makes sense.
Okay.
I even have a sign for you.
Yeah. So we'll give you more directions here in a moment. So we'll get you the screen. So how many of you went to school, probably like college, for something dealing with mathematics? Anybody? No one? Yeah, the smaller class had 2 people. And then they fought over it. Okay. Who does anything with mathematics for their job? Homeschool?
I teach it.
You teach it? You do some in like
Construction count,
sure.
numbers.
That's real mathematics. No, that's homeschool. Ryan, come on up here. We'll let you do mathematics.
I don't really,
You're going to be on camera too. That's why I have the DSLR video camera here.
fantastic reason.
Silly, I spared you from being on camera. Okay, Ray, what's your thing?
All right, so I need someone who knows John 3:16 in the King James Version translation. So who knows John 3:16 in the King James Version? Oh,
It's the
come
wrong
on.
crowd.
Really?
I say believe it and shall, does that count?
Someone who can use the word begotten in their quoting of it. How's that?
There's a reason for that.
Is there? Maybe.
Only begotten Son.
For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life.
Okay. So in King James, does anyone know the King James one?
He had a pretty
the
close.
word that he gave his only begotten Son, so whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life.
Was that begotten? Right?
Yeah, you said begotten. That's the one thing you left out was begotten.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
you
need-
kind of
I
mixed
need
some
word
New
begotten,
King James
sorry.
version in there.
So, would you like a sign?
You bet.
All right. So, have y'all over there?
So hold on, there's one more slide though before we quite get there. So what we're talking about here, okay, is we're setting this up. We're gonna give you a history lesson in a play, essentially. So Ray is going to narrate, and these are going to be the people who are going to be on stage and act this up. You only have to stand and hold the sign. That's all you gotta do.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But we want to talk about different periods of history. Okay? So there is what is called the pre-modern era. Okay? That is anything before 400 AD. Okay? Pre-moderns thought a certain way, they came to truth a certain way. Usually it had to do with whatever authority was in their life, the ruling government, or God or gods. Okay? Is where they got their source of truth from. The modern age, Okay, started in about 1600, and I won't do any spoilers. I'll let Ray fill you in there. Pre-modern. Why it changed to pre-modern? I totally messed it up. Pre-modern is not the gods type thing. It's I'm thinking, what's before pre-modern?
Ancient.
The ancient period. That's not what it is, but we'll go with that. Okay. Things changed at 400 AD for a reason. They change again at 1600. They change again in 1960. That's postmodernism, kind of when people kind of say that's officially when postmodernism started. And if you're taking notes, this is where the notes start to go off track. In 2016, postmodernism died, and we went into postmodernism, and we're going to call it post-truth, because that's what Christian authors seem to be going with.
They just came up with that conclusion. Where did that come from?
Well, we're going to explain that. Okay. Almost everyone agrees, though. Okay. So it's pretty universal. Almost everyone will say yes, it happened. Okay, so.
Who's everyone?
All the secular and Christian philosophers around the world. Does that help?
Yep.
Yes.
What's between 1900 and 1960?
Yeah, so that was in the original slides. I think that's a typo. I think there is this period where modernism is failing, and it takes a little while for something to really fill the gaps. Yeah. So I would actually say modernism is still probably predominant up to that point until postmodernism is fully enforced.
Yeah, so think about it. So modernism was ideal from 1600 to 19. For the next 60 years, that's when, as we'll discuss, people are kind of like, I don't know.
So here's another way of looking at it this way, which kind of cleans up the timeline for you. Pre-modern, modern, postmodern, post-truth. And so really everything we're talking about at this point is not Christian philosophy. This is secular philosophy is all we're talking about when we're really dealing with this. But Christianity, as far as Western civilization, Western philosophy develops, plays a predominant part in it.
So the reason that we're starting at the 400s with this is that what we're going to be looking at is kind of how Christian thought, or the world as it's been influenced by Christian thought, has developed. So we're going to be looking at a long stretch of history, but not all of world history, just the points that are relevant to basically how we got to where we are today. Because the one thing we need to realize is that, like I said, what we believe isn't just this random thing. What we believe today is based on what has come before. And so this is going to help us kind of explain how we got from when Christians in the 4th century were asking about how we get truth, how we understand things, how we got from that point to where we are today. So in the 400s, we had reason was all the way in the back. So reason was there. We like reason, but reason doesn't play a huge part in how the world is operating or how people are thinking at that time. Now, Bible and tradition, if you want to step up and be just shoulder to shoulder, just right next to each other. So at this stage of history, the Bible and tradition are equals. People view them almost with equal authority. Now, think about what the world looked like in the year 400. What do we know about how available the Bible was in the church at that time? Limited, right? And not just that only a few people had a Bible, but churches had Bibles, but only sections of the Bible. So one church might have Ephesians, one might have 1 Corinthians, one might have chunks of the Old Testament. And so at this stage, people can't look at the entire Bible to understand truth, to understand what the Bible is saying. And so they had to rely on tradition, the church fathers who came before them, to see, okay, what did they say about things in the Bible? Because there's things that I just can't check on my own, because I would have to travel days in order to check a different portion of the Bible. And so they would have to basically read the Bible that they had available to them and get truth from that, but fill in the gaps with tradition at that time. So this goes on for a while. You have people who are learning and studying, and they're trying to grow. Well, one problem with this is that at one point we have a man named Arius. Now Arius is reading the Bible, and he reads John 3:16. And what does he read in John 3:16?
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life.
Yeah. So Arius reads, and he focuses on the word begotten. And he's thinking, well, I was begotten by my parents. My parents were begotten by somebody. So clearly Christ was created. And he's starting to question that. And he's saying, okay, well, clearly Christ is not equal with God. He is just a creation, just like everything else. There is one God, and then there's everything that's been created by him. And so this belief system that we now call Arianism starts growing, saying that Christ was a created being, and we still see that today even. Well then, a man named Athanasius, he reads the Bible and he says, no, that does not mean that he was begotten in the terms of created, but it's about his relationship with the Father, that the Father is eternally and constantly sending Christ out. And for sake of this, we're not going to get into what all that means, but the argument was that Christ is eternal, but it's the begotten deals with the relationship. Arius is saying, no, he is created by God, just like everything else in the universe. So people are having confusion, and there's a lot of problems. So we talked last week about these councils that came together, right? And these councils the Council of Nicaea comes together to really dig in and say, what is the truth? What does the Bible truly teach? And they landed on the side of Athanasius, saying that no, Christ is not a created being. And Athanasius went so far as to say that if you believe what Arius is saying, then you are outside of Christianity. You are outside of what's called orthodoxy, or the essential teachings and beliefs in order to be a true follower of Jesus Christ. And that's what happened. That took off. That's why we today would agree with that, and why anyone who believes otherwise, what we would call unorthodox.
This is the same council where Santa Claus punched Arius in the mouth for holding to this view. I'm not kidding. Santa Claus is based off St. Nick, who was a pastor at the time, who was known for giving gifts to children. And if you've ever seen the meme at Christian where it says, it shows an old guy with a beard saying, I came to give gifts to kids and punch heretics in the mouth and I'm all out of gifts. That's where that comes from. So that's how I remember the Council of Nicaea anyways.
Nice. So, new Christmas tradition if anyone's in the market. But here's what happened. So the Bible, people were reading the Bible. Arius was reading the same Bible, but was coming to different conclusions. Tradition is what came along and saved us from error. So here's what happened. So tradition stepped forward. Tradition was now a little more important, because tradition is what saved us from a bad reading of the Bible. If people had just looked at the Bible, they could make up anything they wanted. But it was tradition that came to the rescue. Now, we might be uncomfortable with that. But when we think about tradition in the Bible, here's a good way to think about it. So, who here was saved by hearing the Bible explained to them in some way, actually hearing verses or parts of the Bible given to them? Show of hands. How many of you came to Christ hearing only the Bible, nothing else? No one explained anything to you, just open the Bible and you were hit. Anyone? That is how Bible and tradition play together. You heard the truth from the Bible, but it was explained to you by someone's understanding. That's where the value was. And so as time goes on, more and more people start reading the Bible and coming up with really weird belief systems. So there's questions on, what books do we include in our Bible? Because how many books do we have in our Bible today? 66. How many do they have in the Catholic Bible? Over 70. It depends on which one you get, right? There was a council that talked about that. Just basically, as time went on, more and more councils were convened. And so if you want to take another step forward, tradition became more and more important to the lives of the people. The Bible's still there, reason's still hanging out there, being all stoic and quiet. But more and more, tradition is winning the day. And so this goes on until, like we said, the 1600s. Now, if you know much about history, you know that the Catholic Church was huge at this time, right? And this is how we see why that's the case. Because the Catholic Church was all about, here's what we say, and so here's what you do. And so because what we know about the Catholic Church historically is that only a few select trained men could read the Bible, and then from there they went out and told the common people what it said.
Roman Catholic, to be clear. We're all Catholic.
Yeah, well, I'm getting there. I got it. So that's an important thing, because we think, Catholics or Roman Catholics are so other, but they actually spawn from genuine Christianity. It's just that we see what started happening is that tradition became so prominent that it wasn't what does the Word of God say, but what does the Word of the Church say? What do authorities say? And so that worked for a while. But, there were some rumblings, and study history, you'll see that the Catholic Church had failings all over the place, to where this tradition was starting to get really shaky. But then in the year 1600, what came along that really shook up the world? Martin Luther. But what invention came along?
The Gutenberg.
The Gutenberg press, right? So the ability to print things started getting huge. And so within this, Martin Luther, he starts looking at this stage and he says, this isn't right. We need to see what the Bible tells us first, and if tradition doesn't agree, then too bad. But that was different from what the world said, because what the world was formed as at that point is, what does tradition say, and how can we trust that the Bible is saying that? I mean, the Bible is, to a lot of people's lives, completely null and void, because it was only written in Latin, it was read in church in Latin. No one had any idea what the Bible said, except for what people that you hoped were being honest were telling you. And history tells us they were not being honest most of the time. So as the printing press starts to take off, Martin Luther, the famous 99 Theses and all that, suddenly as the Bible is able to be given to the hands of the people. And so tradition starts stepping back, the Bible starts stepping forward, and once again they can be shoulder to shoulder for a little bit. So if you two want to line up a little bit. Now, as even more people are getting the Bible, it's not just the Bible that people can get, right? Because the printing press wasn't just a Bible maker, it was everything. Anyone who had a thought and had money could print something and distribute it, if they wanted to, across the whole world, in theory, right? So as time is going on, we are seeing that tradition and reason are actually starting to come together. So tradition, if you want to take 2 steps back, reason, if you want to line up with her. So within the Christian worldview now, we have the Bible standing at the forefront. That is where everyone is able to get their truth, because they don't have to go through a priest or a minister to get it. They can get the truth from the Bible itself. Tradition is still valuable, and reason is now starting to take over, because people are learning to read, they're able to get truth from books and things like that. That is starting to grow. But a problem we see is that when Martin Luther started really speaking out, the big thing that the Roman Catholic Church, because we went from kind of a united church to what we now see as the Roman Catholic Church, their big warning was, if you put the Bible in the hands of the people, you're going to have nothing but heresy. You're going to have people believing completely different things. You're going to have so many different people saying things about the Bible. Now, were they right? What do we see today? We have the Roman Catholic Church that is, for all intents and purposes, united, and then we have what we think is hundreds of different denominations in Christianity, and that bothers people, and that to a degree proves the Catholic Church was right. But Martin Luther and the Reformers, they said it is worth it, because we need to see what God says first, not what other people say. So as time is going on, so we're in 1600, so reason is starting to get more and more popular, because people are starting to think, they're starting to discover things about the world, technology is advancing. We look at tradition and we say, tradition, you had a good run, you helped us when we needed you, but tradition has just failed us too many times. Relying on what other people have said, relying on just all these belief systems with no foundation, just isn't working anymore. And so, as time went on, we actually booted tradition off of the world's stage of truth. So,
Go?
Yep, you can sit down.
The world doesn't need you anymore.
Yeah, we
We've
don't.
moved on. Sorry. We still need you, though.
So now, as time's going on, reason is becoming more and more popular. We're still getting truth from the Bible, but the more that we are studying science, medicine, making advances in just human understanding of the world, the more we're starting to say, the Bible is good, but this whole thing about 7 days of creation, well, science is telling us that the world is billions of years old. This thing about God immediately creating a man and then a woman, that was fine for, those kind of weird folklore people, but science tells us that we evolved from, protoplasm. And so more and more, as we are learning about the world, the Bible is taking steps backwards. Because the Bible is becoming more and more outdated. It's becoming more unnecessary because we are able to understand the world better. We're seeing that the world isn't mysterious. We're seeing that it's not this thing that God is ever present in. We can look down to the smallest microscopic level and still not find God. We can study everything about the human body and not see a soul. And so over time, mankind learns so much that we decide, we don't need the Bible anymore either. So you can go sit down. The Bible is useful, and maybe it's still good for morality, but it's not a source of truth. It's not where we turn to understand how the world functions or operates. And so now we just have reason standing here alone. And reason, science, wisdom, humankind's ability is what's going to save the day. And so as time is going on, we start reaching this modern era where more and more we're making advances. And people are looking, they're saying, science can do all these things for us. medicine, we can get rid of the diseases. People aren't dying from the Black Plague and things like that anymore. And people are even starting to dream of the perfect society. Now, does anyone know what that society was going to be called? It was going to be called Utopia. The entire world was going to be a perfect society. No war, no sickness, no unnecessary death. People were going to live, if not forever, at least a long time. It was going to be perfect because we could do it. But what happened in the 1920s? Or before that? What was that?
World War I.
World War I. Sorry, that was before 1920s.
Yeah.
But 1914. World War I comes around. And we see that people are capable of amazing advances, but they're also capable of horrific things. And then the world hits a depression and people are struggling. And then what happens in the 1960s? World War II. And what happened in World War II?
40s, 1940s.
That's 40s.
40s, sorry.
I knew where you were going.
Holocaust.
I love philosophy, I do not love history. I love history, but I'm terrible with placing things. So sorry, the 1940s, yes. So we have World War II, and then what is happening, as we now know, during World War II in Germany? Holocaust. Horrible things. The more that comes out, the more disgusted we should be, because how Jews were treated was disgusting. And the world just gets this shock because reason was supposed to save us. It was supposed to be the thing that was going to bring us up out of these dark, ancient belief systems of the Bible and tradition. We didn't need any of that. Reason was going to be our savior. We were going to be the perfect society for the first time in history. But all we really saw was evil. We saw brokenness. We saw people who felt like maybe they were struggling worse than humanity ever has before. I mean, a society that should be so advanced, people are starving to death still. And so we looked at reason and we said, you failed us too. So you need to go sit down because we can't trust you anymore either. So what are we left with for truth?
Nothing.
We have nothing that we can believe in, nothing that we can rely on. So, if you think of the stage of truth as almost like a shield, right? In the early ages, we had the Bible and tradition. They stood as protectors for us, individuals, who, if we lived back then, who, if we wanted to know truth, if we wanted to understand what things were, we could rely on those things to protect us. But as we got rid of those, we trusted in reason to save us. But when reason failed us, now we have nothing. So anytime something comes in, any thought, any belief, any desire, we have nothing to tell us no. We have nothing to check it against. Because postmodernism, this is all it is. There is absolutely no truth. There is nothing to rely on. There is nothing believable. There is only us, what we think, and what we want to do. We are, from a biblical perspective, we are our own gods. We're the ones who determine what truth is or isn't. We determine what we should or shouldn't do. Now, this can't last forever, right? Because if you study history at all, what happens when there's a power vacuum? What happens when there's no one to call the shots in a country?
Civil War. Chaos.
There's chaos. And from that chaos, what rises up? What replaces the chaos and anarchy? Someone else, right? Whenever there's a vacuum, someone is always there to fill it. And that's where we find ourselves today. There has been a vacuum since the 1960s when people really started doubting everything we thought we knew to be true, everything that we believed in and relied on. And here we sit today, and something is replacing it. And we're going to get more into it, but I want to pause kind of the stage of truth and just leave us here and just say that something is replacing everything that we thought. Something else is taking a stand on the stage of truth, and we're just waiting around to see what it is right now. We're seeing hints of it, we're seeing shadows. We have no idea what it is yet.
The whole point of the stage of truth is to start to understand and to realize that pre-modernism crumbled underneath the weight that it was putting on tradition, okay? And modernism crumbled under the weight that it was putting on reason, because reason was elevated to a point where it could not sustain itself, okay? If you want an example of how reason cannot sustain itself, should you eat butter or should you eat margarine? Okay, they have flip-flopped so many times. Should you wear a mask or not wear a mask for COVID-19? They have flip-flopped so many times that people have just gotten sick of it and they'll do what they want to do. Okay? So reason fails all the time. It is not something, scientific thing to be held in high regard because it fails all the time. Okay? Because sometimes I think we hold this science as this wonderful, beautiful thing that is always objectively true, and unfortunately it just is not. That is not the reality of how those things work. Because modernism crumbled under the weight of reason. Postmodernism is crumbling under the weight of the fact that because nothing is true, you can't even live, and it's self-defeating. And so postmodernism failed, which leaves something in its wake, which is what Ray was getting at, which secular philosophers are calling postmodernism. Some Christian philosophers are coming along and saying post-truth might be a better way of defining it. And there's actually 3 or 4 other terms that people are using as well that are not quite as popular. And so this is taken from a book that if you have school-age children, you should go out and read immediately, called Mama Bear Apologetics. And so this is how they kind of put this all together here. They say in the pre-modern era, until we kind of hit, oftentimes people around the world, how they got their source of truth was through God or gods, observation, some common sense, whatever the authority was in their life, the king or local authorities. The ultimate truth was found in the God, if you're Jewish or Christian, or in gods, multiple plural with a little g if you're not. Modernism then says, hey, God's dead, so now let's just do observation and experimentation. And ultimate truth is found in man's collective reasoning ability, okay? What is the scientific community's consensus on a certain thing, whether it's right or wrong, but is their consensus? Postmodernism keeps observation and experimentation as a source of truth, but they realize that you really can't trust it and it doesn't really matter. And because they have pinpointed that that's just how reason works, it contradicts itself, fails itself, changes its opinion all the time, they say trick question, silly, there's no way to know for sure on what truth is. Now, in post-truth or post-postmodernism, observation, experimentation, experience, blend of all 3 periods really, and really ultimate truth doesn't come in reason, doesn't come in tradition, doesn't come in scripture. It comes purely in the strength of emotion on how you feel about something, and personal conviction is where post-truth has come into the arena. We'll define it more here in a little bit. And so you can kind of see there is a transition period that takes place all the time. Most people, philosophers, so to speak, would say, hey, we would say postmodernism officially starts in 1960, but really doesn't pick up wind until the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, where it really is becoming predominant. Okay? They would also say, everyone who's acknowledged that postmodernism is now dead pinpoints 2016 as being when we can first kind of see it on full display, although I think you can see rumblings of it prior to that, as postmodernism is crumbling in the 2000s. So you might ask the question, 2016, why is that such an important date?
Election year? I don't know.
Nobody blames Trump for post-truth. Sorry. You can blame him for lots of things. That's not one thing. He is a symptom of post-truth, I would argue, but he is not the reason. I think here's my reasoning of what best of I've read, educated myself, concluded on my own from a lot of that, because we're still all struggling with what exactly post-truth is as a culture. There is what's called the modern generation. If you are a pre-boomer, which I don't think there's any pre-boomers in here because that would make you very old, but there's boomers in here, right? Maybe call you, we'll say baby boomers. Boomer's a bad word these days because of millennials. But boomers, you kind of were still in the modern generation. And so some of your thinking is still focused upon modernism, okay? But you've also lived all the way through the beginning to the end of postmodernism, so you're not out of the woods on postmodernism, okay? You are clearly postmodern, growing up in that culture, embracing it and being part of it if you're Gen X or Gen Y, also known as a millennial, okay? As I look around the room, I'm thinking most in the room are Gen X or Gen Y, I think, with some boomers. Then, post-truth generation, that starts in 1996. So if you're born in 1996 or later, you are in the post-truth generation, as they're saying, because you're coming in the death pangs of postmodernism, and you're realizing the failings of postmodernism, and so you're embracing what's called post-truth. That is Gen Z or Gen Alpha. The Busters and Bridgers things I forgot to change those terms. So Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So if you have kids who are in grade school, you have Gen Z or Gen Alpha. Or actually your Gen Zers are probably in college now, right? Yep. So here is kind of to help you with your thinking. If you're a modernist or grew up in modernism, you're going to focus on intellectual. You're going to focus on reason, optimism, hope for the future, objective truth, exclusivism. So in other words, you're going to say, well, this is the consensus. Why can't everyone just agree with me? That might be where the terminology "okay boomer" comes from. Scientific method. And you're going to think man is evolving. Not evolving as an evolution, but you think that man is getting better most of the time in some capacity. Postmodern, though, okay, so millennials and Gen Xers tend to be anti-intellectual, feeling-oriented as opposed to reasoning. Pessimism is usually what rules their mindset instead of optimism. They think things are getting worse. They have despair for the present. That's why you hear a lot of millennials say, should we even have children? What's the point? Bringing kids into this world. That is postmodern thought being portrayed. Subjectivism, relativism. So what do I think as an individual? What is my group that believes like I do think? Pluralism, inclusivism. In other words, all truth is relative for a postmodern, and say, hey, if that's your truth, that's great. This is my truth. Can't we all just get along and be happy? Distrust in science. Okay? And man is getting worse or devolving. Okay. So very sharp difference. And as you can see, really, it's based on the failings of modernism is where postmodernism kind of comes from. Now, what about if you're post-truth? Well, it's not about intellectualism or anti-intellectualism. It's really just about conformity. Okay? Whereas postmodernists tend to say, hey, I want to be my own individual. I want my tattoos. I want my piercings. I want this. I want to be like this. What's my style? Post-truth is more about conformity oftentimes. It doesn't matter. Reason, out the door. Feeling, well, that's important, but it's not really about feeling. It's more about pure passion. Okay? Authenticity. Think of Greta Thunberg. You know, they get her up there. She'd be a post-truther who gets up there and just basically screams at people at the UN. Passion. Okay, that's one thing you can say about her. It's about deconstructionism. So not optimism, not pessimism. Deconstructionism says, let's tear it all down the way it is to figure out how we got there, and then we'll rebuild it. How are we going to rebuild it? Well, we got to tear it down before we can figure that out. That's deconstructionism. Or defund the police is post-truth mentality. It's my way or the highway, which is my way of not using cancel. Okay? Cancel culture. If you don't believe like me, then you can't be a part of this. We are going to cancel you. They will say things like, you are a bigot, you are racist, okay? They will throw those things out there, and then the modernists and the postmodernists are like, what do you mean I'm racist? How do you come up with that idea? Tribalism. It's not objectivism. It's not even subjectivism or relativism. It's about finding your tribe. People who think like you and agree with you and being a part of that. It's all about your tribe.
Now I want to make sure we're being very careful here. When we're talking about post-truth, we're not talking about those people out there. Post-truth is very alive in the church today. If you look at just think about yourselves. Think about how you talk about politics, how you talk about religion, how you talk about anything with people online or live. If you are saying it's my way or the highway, if you don't like it, get away from me, I don't want any part with you. If you are only surrounding yourselves with people who will echo what you say, that is a symptom of post-truth. Because you only want what you think is real, and everyone else is the enemy. Everyone else is wrong. They are other, and they are less human and have less rights than you do.
Yeah. The whole point is these are impacting how we think. I'm not saying these are right. In fact, I'm saying these are all wrong. Next week we're going to come back and say this is not how a Christian orients their truth. These are all wrong. But we need to realize how it's impacting us before we can really kind of focus on the correct way of doing things. It's not about being exclusive, getting everyone to think that way. It's not even about pluralism or finding a small group or inclusivism, inviting everybody to the table and everyone can believe what they want. It's more about intersectionality. These tribes get like-minded people, and then you find common points of interest amongst the different tribes, and that's called intersectionality. And the more points of intersectionality you can have, the more you can integrate and agree on things. Okay? Science does not matter for the post-truther. Scientific method was all about modernism, distrust in science for postmodernism, and post-truth's like, why does it matter? Who cares? Because I'm going to believe what I'm going to believe, and I'm going to believe it passionately. And whether the science says it or not, or doesn't say it, I don't care, because that's my truth. And you will agree with me just because that's what I believe, and I feel that way, or I'm passionate about it.
So if science agrees, science is right. If science disagrees with our beliefs, then science is corrupted, or those who did the science are have a different agenda.
Yeah. And whereas modernism says man's evolving, postmodernism says man is devolving, post-truth says people are what they want to be. It doesn't matter. As long as it's your truth, you believe it, and you're passionate about it. I'll give you a second to make sure you write those down, because those are not in your notes. But this is the observation of philosophers around the world. This is not something, I'm not getting this from Scripture. This is just humankind saying this is where culture is going. Okay? So, oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. This next slide, you saw Spock. Okay? It's not because I'm a geek, but this is in here. There is a famous philosophy book written about postmodernism that uses Spock and Commander Data to make a point. Okay? So, now I do have to update it for post-truth, and I had to pull a third character in there, so I'll hold you in suspense. The ideal modern man is Mr. Spock. This is 1960s. Postmodernism is a fledgling new thing, and so those who are writing, Gene Roddenberry, who's writing Star Trek, is a modernist. And so he's saying, what's the ideal modern person? Well, it's Spock. Spock is always logical and objective. He never acts upon feeling, because that would be illogical. His quotes are from the show, physical laws simply cannot be ignored. Existence cannot be without them. Pain is a thing of the mind. The mind can be controlled. Okay? He's the ideal modern man. Well then, fast forward to the 80s, and we got Star Trek The Next Generation. Well, now there is a lot more postmodernism played into Star Trek The Next Generation. Did you know Star Trek was such a good philosophy show? I know some parents who actually had their kids watch all the Star Trek, from the original Star Trek all the way through like Enterprise, and they used it just to make theological and philosophical and cultural points throughout the end of every single show. It was kind of crazy. So, anyways, the ideal modern man is Data. Data is ideal, just like Spock. Okay? But did you realize that Star Trek The Next Generation is all about mocking Data when you start to think about it? Data is the perfect human being, or modern human, so to speak. He's rational, he can think, he's logical, okay? He doesn't have feeling, he doesn't have emotion, but what is Data always going after in the show? He wants to be human. He wants to feel emotion. Despite his perfection, Data wants to be human. He rebels against logic and will do illogical things just to fit in, attempts to develop emotions and feelings. He is making fun of modernism and its failings in the world. Okay? That is the philosophical case study that they did in this famous book. Well, what about post-truth? Who do we use for that? Now, the new Star Trek shows are terrible. So I could not come up with a good character for that because they're all just so one-sided and terrible and not even really worth watching from what I have watched of them. So I actually had to do a terrible, terrible thing, and I had to pull from Star Wars. You don't mix Star Trek and Star Wars. I'm sorry. So, what would Harry Potter say about it? The ideal postmodern person mocked is Kylo Ren. Okay? Kylo Ren is the ideal postmodern person. Despite being ideal, I mean, think about this, right? Kylo Ren requires conformity. He says everybody has to be part of the First Order. He rejects any opposing views. People are telling him, hey, that's not reality. They're telling him alternative views the whole time, and he rejects all of them throughout the entire trilogy. He seeks to destroy what he does not agree with. His most famous line from the entire movies are, let the past die, kill it if you have to. He might as well just said defund the police. Okay? Tear it down and let's rebuild it. And if you watch the show, he really has zero motivation for doing any of this the entire time. Okay? So yes, I am panning the new Star Wars at the same time of realizing he's the ideal postmodern person who's being mocked. If Star Trek and Star Wars is not your thing, how about baseball? In baseball, here's how this works out. The pre-modernist says, there's balls and there's strikes. I call them as they are. In other words, I don't get to determine what they are. They've already been declared for me by the gods or God. The modernist comes along and says, there's balls and there's strikes, and I call them as I see them, observe them. Okay? The postmodernist says, they ain't nothing till I call them. But the post-truther says, if you don't agree that is a strike, you can't play. Because you're not on the tribe. And you will conform. Or we will destroy baseball and remake it so it's always a strike. Maybe. We're not sure what we're doing. Anything you want to add to that, Ray?
No.
Okay, we're almost done here. In postmodernism, there is no objective universal truth. There is only the perspective of the group. In postmodernism, all viewpoints, all lifestyles, all beliefs, and all behaviors are regarded as equally valid. So Christians have a right to exist. Muslims have a right to exist. Atheists have a right to exist. We're all valid for our own truth in postmodernism, and we can all just get along. Let's find a way to get along and still have this melting pot of ideas. Tolerance has become so important that the exception is that no exception is tolerated. So in postmodernism, the only intolerance that is seen as a sin, so to speak, is that you're not tolerant of other things. And so Christianity struggled in postmodernism because Christianity here makes a truth claim that Jesus is the only way to God. Okay? And so Christianity is seen as a target on its back during postmodernism. Just because of that exclusivity, because that's a modernist way of thinking, and they're rebelling against modernism. Postmodernism, this is from a secular philosopher. He says, postmodernism is tribalism to the extreme and with the gloves off. In other words, they are warlike in nature. It might just be the ultimate extension or intensification of postmodernism. It's postmodern to the extent that it accepts the reality of difference and the reality of tribalism. It even will play language games, like I talked about earlier, and unique standpoints. Unlike modernism, it doesn't seek to transcend those boundaries, so it's not trying to get everyone together. It's realizing, hey, you think differently, I think differently, that's not okay. But it is postmodern, and it is not chastened by epistemic humility, but hardened by certainty. So whereas postmodernism would say, hey, it's okay to have different viewpoints. We'll just all agree to disagree. Okay? As long as you're not saying your view is exclusive. Postmodernism says, whoa, whoa, whoa. Everybody's view is exclusive, and you have to think the way I'm going to think. That's the key. And as it says here, it says, I lost the place. Oh, it's hardened by certainty. So whether something's objective truth or not, because I passionately feel so that it's so real and so truthful to me, you better believe that too. Based on my passion, not based on truth. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's true for me, I believe it, and you will believe it because I'm certain about it. In the postmodern mood, there may be a recognition that we don't have absolute truth. But that doesn't make any difference because we don't care. Postmodernists don't care if there's absolute truth. It doesn't change the way we relate to others. It doesn't change the way we understand our place in the world even. It isn't chastened by difference and otherness, but angered by it. It isn't motivated by peace, but by war. Okay? So now, whereas Christianity was the one exclusive voice during postmodernism, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to God except through him. Now, on the other side of postmodernism, in post-truth or post-postmodernism, now all these different viewpoints are weaponizing for war because they're saying theirs is exclusive. Do you see where this is going? Do you see why things are so heightened and so just poisonous and toxic in our culture right now? Because people are so certain whether truth or reality or science doesn't really matter, but that's the way it is. Does the vaccine protect you from COVID-19?
No.
What if someone says, I believe it does? And by you not having it, you're putting me at risk who does have it.
Well,
You see how that's a self-defeating statement?
But if you have it, you shouldn't be at risk.
Whoa,
Vaccine.
stop using objective truth. I passionately believe about that. Therefore, I will make you conform and you will take the vaccine. That's what's going on in the world right now. You are seeing I don't believe all that.
No, I figured you didn't.
I was a little intense there, so I wanted to make sure we're good. But that's what's going on. Hey, you better wear a mask. Oh, I refuse to wear a mask. Well, why do you refuse to wear a mask? Because I believe really passionately that I don't like masks and I refuse to wear a mask. Is there a biblical reason for not wearing a mask?
There is, many of them apply Psalm 91.
My whole point is, as Christians, we are not exempt from post-truth. We are weaponizing and fighting the same battles, and they're not even the right battles to fight. I made a point this morning. I said, we're going to so screw up religious exemptions, we're going to lose them. With this whole battle with masks. And the government's going to take them away. And you know what's going to happen? Something's going to come along where we're really going to want a religious exemption because it really matters. I mean, really matters, not just an inconvenience of covering our face. Okay? I mean, it's going to be something on the level where we're like, that is just downright heresy. I cannot do that. And we're not going to have access to them. And we are going to pay the price for it.
The saddest part you said in there was that the government's going to take it away.
I know. But my whole point is, if we make a fight, if we take a stand on something that does not matter for the cause of Christ, when it really does matter, it may not be there. Okay? So, that's kind of where I'm going with it. We need to be careful with what we're doing and not fall into the same trap as other post-truthers. So, that being said, I do have a video that will end on. It's 3 minutes long. We are a little over, so if you need to go, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll watch the video and then we'll dismiss.
Apologetics seeks to give credible answers to curious questions. Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. My name is Bobby Conway, and we are actually down here at RZIM getting some of the speakers. And Abdu Murray, you are one of the itinerant speakers for the national speaking team, overseeing the team as well, right?
I am, I'm breaking the record, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, we're glad to have you on the program. We thank you for your writings and your work and your ministry. I have a question for you. Would you say that we are in a post-truth culture?
I think the answer is resounding yes to that, actually, and I think that it's very different than a postmodern culture. Postmodernism rejected the idea of objective truth altogether, and of course that's self-defeating, as you well know. You know, if someone says there's no such thing as truth, you simply ask them, is that statement true, and it all falls apart. Post-truth is different. Post-truth doesn't reject truth's existence. It just subordinates it to feelings and preferences. So a post-truth person would say, yeah, there's objective truth, but if it conflicts with my preferences, then I don't care. My preferences matter more. So something is post-truth if it elevates feelings and preferences above truth and facts. And I think what you're seeing today, whether it's in the realm of politics, whether it's in the realm of sexuality, whether it's in the realm of religion, is a post-truth culture that elevates those preferences to the point where if I don't affirm your preferences, now I'm labeled hateful things like bigot or fascist or whatever it might be. And on all sides we're doing this, on all sides, because we're elevating our agendas above what's true actually. I think the way to actually combat that and to come back at this post-truth culture is forming solid argument, but also showing people what the consequences of living in a post-truth culture actually are. And the consequences are we lose our sense of reason, we lose our sense of accountability because our preferences matter more than anything else, and we lose our sense of human value. How is that the case? Well, think about it. We're no longer talking about freedom in this country. We use the word freedom, what we really mean is autonomy. And autonomy comes from two Greek words, autos meaning self, nomos meaning law. So we don't want to be free, we want to be laws unto ourselves. Freedom has boundaries, and that boundary is truth. When you're autonomous, you are a law unto yourself. Here's the problem. If my preferences matter more than truth, and someone else's preferences matter more than truth, and I'm a law unto myself, and that person's a law unto themselves, when my preferences clash with their preferences, truth won't be the deciding factor because truth's on the bottom shelf. It won't be truth, it'll be power. And that is a recipe for chaos, where we lose reason, accountability, and a sense of human value. And that's what happens when truth is gone. We become enslaved to our autonomy, which is why Jesus so remarkably says in John chapter 8, you will know the truth, and this truth will set you free. Jesus links truth and freedom. Post-truth says autonomy leads to freedom. Jesus says it's truth that leads to freedom.
Just so you know, this was recorded pre-COVID, pre-Black Lives Matter riots. People recognized post-truth before any of the craziness happened. This is not people reacting and coming up with something as a result of all that. But it was in 2016, 2017, 2018, people realized the shift had already happened. So, that being said, let's close in a word of prayer.
Chris, I just want to say one thing.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
So, as you're all kind of coming down from this and thinking through post-truth and how it may be affecting you, I want you to just keep this in your mind as you're going throughout your week. So, when Chris was talking about vaccines, a lot of people murmured agreement that vaccines don't protect us. Ask yourself where you get that truth. Do you get it from looking at both sides of the argument, looking at the actual science, or do you get it from a news source that tells you that, or have you sought out a scientific source that already confirms what you want to believe? Because that's what post-truth is. It's not about what is real, it's who is going to tell me what I want to hear. So as you're going through the week, as you're listening to news, looking up stuff on Facebook, the groups that you follow, really look at what they're telling you. Are they telling you truth, or are they telling you about how your side is right and they are wrong? Most of us, I assume in here, are conservative Republicans. So is what you're listening to just saying that they are the enemy, they are ruining everything, that if we don't succeed, that everything is doomed? Because that's all they're doing. They are setting up tribalism in your mind. And what you are consuming is going to determine what your health is. It determines how you think. So be very careful about, like I said, just saying, oh yeah, all those people are doing that. Because we are doing it. If we follow really any news outlet, we're not following them for truth, we're following them for the truth that we want, that agrees with the tribe that we belong to. And when we do that, Christianity and our walk with Christ is going to suffer too.
And by no means are we making any kind of declaration for you on vaccine or not vaccine. That's for you to make. That's a Christian liberty thing. I don't care whether you get it or not. Let's close our word of prayer. Heavenly Father, help us. Things are getting worse and worse. We see it, we know it. The world's seeing it, yet we keep chasing down this hole. And the reality is, it's just human depravity playing out. And the only solution for it is your word. It's Jesus Christ. And we know that no matter how bad things get, and we know they'll get very, very bad, someday, it could be 1,000 years from now, it could be 2,000 years from now. But we know ultimately how it's all going to end. And it's going to come back with Christ coming back. subjecting the world to his authority, and everybody will give an account. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and that ultimate truth is found in you and you alone. Help us to realize that now as we live our lives here. In praise in Jesus' name.